In most cases, speedrunners have a lot of passion for the games they run. Some go as far as to putting thousands of hours into a single-player game that was only ever intended for a few playthroughs every couple of years or so. You know, the normal type of experience. The experience that most developers envision. In some cases, these developers are very understanding of how much a person may want to play their game, which leads to them adding various New Game Plus options such as the outfits and unlimited ammo of Resident Evil 5, alternate scenarios like Resident Evil 2's B or Second scenario, unlockable items like Silent Hill's Katana and Channeling Stone, harder difficulties such as the infamous Ultra Nightmare in Doom, new endings such as the plethora that you can get in Clock Tower, and many, many more. Even though some developers don't necessarily like their game being broken, it's not uncommon to see glitches and exploits go unpatched. The combination of developers adding a lot of extra content as well as unlockables, and the fact that there are glitches and exploits, I mean, it's a wonderful thing for speedrunners. This leads to a variety of categories outside of the more common ones. How exactly does this all tie into multiplayer games, though? Well, when it comes to multiplayer games, those different scenarios, difficulties, or endings aren't as important, because the content itself tends to lean towards things like level progression, unlocking cosmetics with currency, or climbing a leaderboard or ranking system in a competitive mode. In most cases, this doesn't really lead to a good speed game, because a lot of exploits you could use in a PvE game mode will most likely get patched to ensure that the game is being played as close to the intended way as possible. Pretty understandable, but balancing, bug fixes, big content updates, all of this can lead to many different patches that are required to continue playing the games. Developers want to make sure the player base is satisfied, but what does this mean for speedrunners? What happens when a multiplayer PvE game gets patched, and its speedrunning community has to resolve the issues that may come with it? A lot of these communities tend to ask themselves, can we downpatch? What was fixed, and what can we still exploit? What do we do with the leaderboard? These are all questions that lead to some hard decisions, and divisive results. I'm here to talk about my experience with a multiplayer PvE game that went wrong. This is the story of how Turtle Rock Studios killed Back 4 Blood speedrunning. For those of you who don't know what Back 4 Blood is, well, it's a spiritual successor to Left 4 Dead, created by Turtle Rock Studios. Much like Left 4 Dead, it's a primarily PvE-focused first-person shooter that involves surviving a zombie-filled world through various campaigns and levels. You can have up to 4 players in campaign mode, and you have a few difficulties to choose from. Although, Back 4 Blood doesn't necessarily play like Left 4 Dead. It's much more evolved. It has a lot more depth to it, but a lot of the core mechanics are still there. The zombie-filled world is a similar concept, containing waves of normal and mutated ridden, quick fetch quests, objectives that are timed while an endless horde of ridden spawn, and corny dialogue that will simultaneously make you laugh and slam your keyboard on your face. The biggest difference that is introduced in Back 4 Blood is the card system. Cards allow various perks that will help you out in your apocalyptic endeavor. Just a few examples of what these cards can do include increasing the health pools of you and your teammates, increasing weak spot damage done to mutated ridden, supplying the team with more equipment slots, finding more copper and item spawns, and many, many more. With these cards, you can build decks that fit a specific playstyle, which will greatly enhance your team's chances of surviving certain situations. Some focus on high damage for a glass cannon type of build, some focus on survivability with healing and resistance, and some focus on taking advantage of equipment and tools. One of the categories of cards is called mobility. These mobility cards are what gives you more movement speed, more stamina, sprint efficiency, and use speed. With the right mobility cards, you can create the perfect speedrun build, which was clearly intended with how many of these cards there are. Now that I've explained the basics of how this game works, let me take you back to where the speedrunning story all began. On October 7th, 2021, Back 4 Blood was opened up to everyone who pre-ordered a non-standard version of the game, as well as content creators who were given codes. Fortunately, thanks to my wonderful girlfriend Biddy, I was able to access this version via a code, and streamed it on the night of the 7th. It was a ton of fun playing with her and our friends, but I won't forget finishing stream and realizing that you can play the game solo, with every card unlocked. The reason why I'm putting so much emphasis on that is because when you play normally online, you have to earn supply points, and those supply points are used to unlock those cards. Here, in solo campaign, nope, you just have all of them unlocked. That's it. Easy. This instantly opened up a chance for me to create an optimal speedrunning deck and just try out a run. So there I was, about 2 days later, running the entire game on recruit difficulty with an insanely fast deck. I beat the entire campaign in an hour and 43 minutes, I posted it to YouTube, and I got some very interesting results. Back 4 Blood's social media manager retweeted it a few days later, and a week after that, I even had a few articles written about me from sites like The Gamer and The Game Creator. It was actually so cool to see the social media manager retweet my speedrun, and it motivated me to start up the Discord, get the speedrun.com leaderboard up and running, and try to get the community in touch with each other. By the time the game was fully released on October 12th, people were already quite interested in how I was beating levels so quickly and how my movement speed was so fast. I mean, it was so fast. People asked if I had my game sped up, or if I was just straight up cheating. I simply answered, nope, I just chose a bunch of mobility cards. I mean, I'm inclined to believe that that one run that I did, and my quick work to get the Discord and leaderboard up, led to quite a lot of people interested in running the game themselves, and a spike in speed builds. A lot of people started to join the Discord, discussing optimal card orders for decks, possible movement tech, strats that can only be done with a certain movement speed, and even finding skips. It was a very exciting first couple of weeks, and I felt like a good speed game was emerging for people who enjoy fast first-person shooter runs. There were very impressive runners already pushing Act 1, the most popular act to speedrun. It went from a little under 40 minutes in that first run that I posted, all the way down to a sub 32 by Steve, aka Shut-In Steve. His Irish luck wasn't the only thing that helped him get the first and only 31 though. It was also the November patch. This is where things take a weird turn. Obviously, with a big new release like this, it's safe to assume there will be a lot of bugs and issues that constantly arise. A lot of these bugs and issues weren't entirely game-breaking, but there were quite a few that needed some attention from the devs. There was definitely a lot of complaints about the balancing issues between Veteran and the hardest difficulty, Nightmare. Certain builds that were popular and very fun to play were being targeted as builds that break the game, despite so many complaints about how difficult Nightmare was. These builds were clearly intended, and in a PvE game, stuff like that's bound to happen. It doesn't really make the experience any less fun. If anything, it makes it more fun and allows for a more fair Nightmare experience for the more casual players. In what seems to be a lack of understanding of that dynamic, Turtle Rock listened to that feedback and took it as a sign that they needed to nerf the builds that were too strong. In this update, that certain build was Melee, one of the most fun builds in the game for a lot of people, with a large emphasis on risk and reward on higher difficulties. Yeah, it was overpowered, but I think people were having a lot of fun, and it's safe to say that you couldn't just pick up that build and carry a random team to victory consistently. Especially not on Nightmare. Well, anyways, it got nerfed, and people were unhappy. Another thing that goes hand in hand with what I just explained is the buff to the two bosses, Ogre and Breaker. The Ogre was changed in a way that simply made it slightly harder, which was probably needed for being the hardest boss mutation in the game. The real problem here is the Breaker buff. They made his weak spots much more durable, which led to even more players not really fighting it in its intended way. Instead, a lot of people implemented the nade build, which can become so powerful later on in the deck that you can kill any boss mutation in the game in just a few nades. Why discourage fighting bosses the intended way when they clearly want people to not cheese the game? It's a bit contradictory. Despite these few things, the only real thing that happened to the speedrun route was using flashbangs on the first breaker in Act 1, and then killing all of the bosses at the end of Act 2 using the nade build. So you're probably wondering, what's the speedrunning problem in this patch then? Well, let's get into that then. There were multiple things that changed, and they weren't even described in the patch notes. One of these was a huge change to how the speedrun worked. They added acceleration to movement. What does this mean, Mr. Maxi? You probably ask. Well, let me break it down for you. Starting out in a standing still position, you can hold forward and sprint in order to reach your maximum movement speed right away from that standing still position. In this patch, they have added a period of acceleration so that you are building speed before you can hit that maximum movement speed. During that period of acceleration, you are losing stamina. See, this is really small to a lot of people, but when you're running a full mobility deck to speedrun the game, it's a massive change. And it's actually awful. Not only is it awful, but it is so unneeded because it makes movement in general for everybody feel like you're slipping on ice. The reason why is because you decelerate due to a lot of things, which means you have to re-accelerate to get your movement speed back up to maximum. Turning quickly, getting hit, stopping to open a door or interact with an object, and even shooting. All of these things would mean that you would have to lose stamina during a period of acceleration. Not only that, but there's some movement tech that we call stam hopping, and because of this change, it's become way less useful. Let me explain stam hopping really quickly for you. No, it's not like bunny hopping, hence why we just called it stam hopping. It's the act of holding down your sprint button to sprint, and then pressing the jump button the moment that you let go of the sprint button. With the right timing, you can jump at full sprint speed without using up extra stamina like you usually would when you're pressing the jump button while holding down sprint. In conclusion, the added acceleration and deceleration caused stam hopping to be less useful, as we couldn't really utilize it to its full potential anymore. Again, I'd like to remind you that this wasn't even a change explained in the patch notes. It made speedrunning slower, it nerfed a satisfying bit of tech in the game, and it also kind of ruined movement for a lot of players, not just speedrunners. This alone was already something that made a lot of people who were speedrunning the game and submitting to the leaderboard not want to participate anymore. And I'll explain why. They understandably didn't want to participate anymore, because in a first-person shooter speedrun, or a first-person speedrun in general, one of the most important things is to have smooth, enjoyable movement, and maybe with a bit of tech thrown in to raise the skill ceiling. This change turned the crisp, snappy movement that we once had into a sluggish, sloppy annoyance. Multiple other things were changed for the better, as it had an emphasis on fixing bugs, problems with AI, and connection issues. But overall, this was not a good look for Turtle Rock, as a lot of the player base became very upset at the changes. Most notably, the changes to melee and bosses, without even balancing Veteran or Nightmare yet. After 1 month and just one patch, a lot of the speedrunning community was understandably upset. Myself and the other moderators were as well, but we had to figure out how to adjust the leaderboard. Despite temptation from quite a few people in the community, we didn't really want to have to downpatch an online-only game for it to feel right again, and deal with the complications of new runners and co-op runners finding it inaccessible. After a lot of thinking and feedback, we archived the 1.0 runs into miscellaneous categories, and moved on. We didn't want to remove them, but we also wanted to keep the current patch as the main one shown on the board so we could try to get things rolling again. It started out as such a good speed game, and many people did continue to run and accept the cruel fate of the sloppy movement. There was still hope and determination to get better times. There was also a lot of hope that whatever the December patch had in store for us wouldn't have us resort to changing everything again. I mean, if anything, it seemed promising, since what they teased was just adding content to the game and making a few simple changes to Fort Hope and the menu. Oh, how wrong we were. How painfully wrong we truly were in those weeks prior to the December update. This is where we get to the real meat of the story and the reasoning behind this video. A few days before the December patch, there was a screenshot floating around, which was supposedly the upcoming patch notes that had yet to be released. I really didn't want to believe them, as I thought maybe they were just forged by somebody really good at Photoshop, but they were true. These are the most painful patch notes I think I've ever read for speedrunning in my entire life. The first big offender. A bunch of mobility deck cards that the speedrunning community utilized to achieve such fast times were all nerfed. Fleet of Foot, Mad Dash, Olympic Sprinter, Rhythmic Breathing, Run Like Hell, Speed Demon, and Energy Drink. All nerfed. They even went as far as to nerfing the lightweight stock movement speed buffs. If you combine all of these nerfs together, you get a 14% decrease in possible movement speed, a 30% decrease in total stamina, a 10% decrease in stamina efficiency, and a 4% decrease in damage resistance. You may think these numbers aren't big, but boy oh boy they are. They really are, and I can't stress that enough when you're trying to shave off seconds in various chapters in the run. These nerfs make pretty much every single category, except maybe Act 4, impossible to get faster times in than the previous patches. The only thing to even slightly balance out this huge nerf was to make the acceleration the tiniest bit faster and buff the energy bar card, which we don't even use in an optimal deck. They even nerfed cards like Evasive, Pep in Your Step, Stimulants, and a couple others, just to take away possible alternatives to the cards we would use beforehand in an optimal run. Now, I mean, if you've made it this far in the video, you're probably just empathizing with the speedrunning community and coming to understand how these changes really ruined things for us. But stay with me here, because every player, even if you don't use these speed cards, should be worried about Turtle Rock's statement about the nerf of this. Just stick with me here, listen to this. Turtle Rock's statement was, "We noticed that the use of speedrunning decks was creating tension between players, as a single player would utilize a speedrunning deck to separate from the rest of their team to rush ahead to finish the level. We made the following changes to bring speedrunning more in line with the viability of other strategies and builds." This statement really sits wrong with me, because to bring speedrunning more in line with the viability of other strategies and builds makes no sense at all. Decks that are made with the purpose of speedrunning will never be viable with literally any other deck build in the game, because the purpose of it is to speedrun. I'm serious, no other deck can possibly keep up with this build, even after the nerf, and this tension is just going to continue to happen. Every single player that cares about this game and will continue to play it should read this and instantly see a huge red flag. Turtle Rock Studios making a change to their game to try and control the behavior of players, and the changing that they're making is not only making that build less fun and ruining the experience for some people, but it's not even going to stop the build from doing what they don't want it to do. And let me make this clear. The Back 4 Blood speedrunning community members, including myself, never encouraged this type of play. We only encouraged this when doing actual solo or co-op speedrun attempts, and these were done just amongst ourselves, not with randoms in random lobbies. It's quite sad that from before the game even fully released, the speedrunning community shed light on how much fun it can be to speed through the game with an intended playstyle, and the various challenges that come with it. Sacrificing survivability, utility, firepower, and tactical card picking to make very risky choices, all for the love and thrill of possibly beating it really quickly. Sure, it's not what the developers had in mind, but these decisions in the patches feel like they come from a lack of understanding of how players like to play the game. If that wasn't already bad enough, this next one is also a doozy. And it's also followed by a pitiful statement, yet again, and a bit of juicy unknown information. The removal of stam hopping. Their wording, even more pitiful than the removal itself. They stated, fixed an issue where jumping while sprinting wouldn't consume additional stamina. They said it was an issue, as if it somehow didn't make the game's skill ceiling higher, or make for a much more interesting and rewarding gameplay experience. Nobody complained about this. Literally nobody in the player base complained about this. The only reason why developers even knew about stam hopping was because they watched speedrunners. Nobody complained about it, and even the non-speedrunners liked utilizing it, as it's simply a fun mechanic. Now, here's a bit of juicy information to back that. A good friend of mine, Hazeblade, was actually in contact with the Back 4 Blood developers in November, in which he was in direct contact with a head dev. Hazeblade was given a heads up on how certain things were going to be kept in the game to keep speedrunning viable. One of those things was stamina hopping. Obviously, that was a lie, which just leads to more trust issues with the developers and the speedrunning community. Hazeblade actually gave so much amazing feedback to them, especially since we thought that there was actually a good relationship being made. I'd like to think that this lead dev didn't have ill intentions, but in the end, Hazeblade's contribution and effort to reach out was used against him and the rest of the speedrunning community. Hazeblade quotes that, "I wish I could have recorded the call with them. Most of what's in that patch regarding the written behaviors came from me. I presented those ideas to the Gentleman Squirrel, and he put them in the game. It's a slap in the face to take that and then also block speedrunners from doing their thing." Obviously, the dev team's intentions is to make the game the best that it can be, while trying to balance it. But this is a pretty obvious case of developers simply using speedrunners as QA testers. You can't please everyone with these types of games, especially with a large player base who all play the game very differently, but this feels like they are trying to control player behavior more than actually trying to keep the game's mechanics and content a fun, balanced experience. Much like many other games, the people who are left streaming and posting videos of the game later down the line are usually speedrunners. Their passion pushes them to spend hundreds of hours optimizing just a single section of the games they run, let alone the possible thousands of hours running a category. To summarize things, I'd like to reiterate that the speedrunning community shouldn't be given some special treatment because of this, but I also think that Turtle Rock have not only taken the fun out of the speedrun, but they have specifically targeted us and made changes to purposefully deter our community from continuing to run their game. And what does this mean for the rest of the player base? Well, these patches make me feel like Turtle Rock aren't interested in watching players beat their game the way that the players want to beat it. Turtle Rock want players to beat the game the way that Turtle Rock wants the players to beat it. Thanks for watching and making it this far into the video. I really do appreciate all of the support that you've all been giving me this past year, and it makes me want to pursue YouTube even more. Make sure that you subscribe, as well as leave a like and a comment about your thoughts on this game's patches, or maybe your thoughts on what I had to share with all of you. I also want to thank everyone in the Back 4 Blood speedrunning community who have held their heads high through all of this, as well as trusting me and the other community members to make the right decisions during these updates. Much love, and I'll see you again soon for another thrilling speedrunning story.